Hi, everybody. Michelle and Serban from Eluvio, and thanks so much for having us. We think it's wonderful that this group was formed. And I know this is going to be just a high-level intro today to us and our use cases, but we just wanted to first of all say thank you for including us. We're coming to you from Berkeley, California, where we're headquartered. And as many of you are, we are an engineering team startup started 4 years ago, and we have created a new platform really aiming at what we think is sort of next generation video and content over the internet. It is also a full stack blockchain. What we thought we would do today is first of all, tell you a little bit about the foundations of that, why we did it, and sort of where we're trying to aim it. We're going to show you one of our use cases that has elements of what we think is the metaverse experience of today and maybe leaning into what it can be tomorrow that's served on our platform in the context of movies. And then I'm going to, and I'll start that off, and then I'll turn it over to Serban, and he actually prepared a little more detail to get into on the content fabric protocol, which is probably beyond the full scope of our time today, but we'll give you a taste for how that's really built, and then we'll take questions. So hopefully it can be informative and helpful to everybody. So let me just share out my screen. I'm going to do just a short intro before some demos on this first use case. And the very beginning of this will be quite standard from us, but I think it is good to get a sense of how we, show and present ourselves out to the world at large. So first of all, our mission, as Ruslan was mentioning, is really to get at unlocking the value of creative IP. And by that, we mean enabling with technology the possibility of being able to own and distribute your own content. And where does that fit in the scheme of the metaverse? Well, really, we think that that's one of the backbone motivations of being able to extend the internet into these new kinds of experiences. We're really doing this from the standpoint of technology, and then let the technology enable the new experiences and the if you will, economics of that. And our core technology is a protocol. Some of you might know Serban and I and our backgrounds. We've enjoyed working on content over the internet for a very long time. Now we're much older than we were when we started Aspera many years ago. We had the notion that we could really do something significant for video, given that it's obviously 80% plus of internet traffic. We also have been exposed to a lot of the distribution challenges that face kind of the whole supply chain. And the content fabric is really a whole cloth approach to decentralized storage and distribution and self-serving of content. And when I'll explain what we mean by self-serving, one of the most important properties of the way the content fabric works is that the content in the network is itself programmable. It self-serves, and code is as much a part of the storage and mechanism as the content itself is. One of the other key ideas that we really wanted to go after was efficiency. For many reasons, the typical sort of supply chain for content, and when you think about its many phases, is it not only has a lot of duplication, it also has, in terms of video, it also has many impediments to being able to do real-time sort of content serving at scale. And we wanted to kind of attack that bottom up with an architecture that would eliminate fundamentally the regeneration, copying, and distribution of the same stuff over and over again. And then finally, we kind of recognized, and I think in a metaverse community like this, it's very much worth acknowledging that the internet was sort of at a tipping point. Blockchain technology had become mature enough that you could really start to exploit the organizing principles of blockchain to inspire a protocol that would, not only provide for self-protection of the content, but it would also allow for the content lifecycle to have a sort of tamper-proof nature. Along with that, we anticipated, and nobody knew for sure, that blockchain economics would become not only scalable, but popular for engagement with users. And we do find, and you'll see in our use cases, that this is really fundamental to the whole interactive experience. The user is doing that as themselves as a blockchain address. They are able to, the owner themselves able to not only protect their content, but also to reach the user directly in a way that allows them to own and even, in a way, retrade in the experience itself, which we'll get into. So Serban's going to talk to the protocol a little bit more, but when you think about it as a distribution protocol, it's really focused on not only the storage of content, but the active streaming and distribution of it. And as I mentioned, it has this unique property of working in a programmable way that avoids file copies, is fully componentized, and allows for an ever-growing open network. It's also open source, and we'll get into that, which makes it very important to us to be active in communities like this. And then finally, it is driven by these on-chain principles, both in the end-to-end encryption cycle for the content, and also in versioning and blockchain access control. And by the way, I will mention for major or IP owners, whether they're big Hollywood studios or individuals or even rising folks that wish to protect their IP, I think it's quite fundamental that the ownership model in the experience be meaningful and something that can scale sort of person to person. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is more about our products, but you'll see this kind of comes through. We built an API layer on top of the core fabric that has become a full-featured platform for interactive, well, first of all, streaming video and also interactive experiences. And it has native Web3 properties. One of the other things that is also kind of inspired in the back of this, and I mentioned this earlier, our core team, Serban and I, and several people in our core development group built Sparrow, which is a bulk data transfer protocol, a thing of its time as well. And we'll see as we get into this that this is very much a thing of what we think is this time. It's decentralized as opposed to looking at the long haul network, and it also allows for real-time and end-to-end kind of experiences, something that we didn't get to tackle and wasn't really the problem of the day when we built a Sparrow. Web3 experiences. So I'm going to talk to this a little bit because we're going to talk about how the Fabric hosts and serves interactive experiences. Among some of our projects are these new Web3 movies. And the reason I'm going to pick that today is it's probably the most pertinent to what you all are thinking about. It has the most interactivity going on. All of the types of projects we've been involved in are some variants on this kind of idea. One of the other pieces I would say about the Web3-ness of this is that all of the projects that you see on our platform are owner controlled, meaning the brand is owning the content. They are distributing it controlled with, encrypted with their owner keys when they publish. They also have the direct relationship with the consumer. Our platform is not an intermediary licensor of the content. And also when the consumer is experiencing, that project, for example, a Web3 movie bundle, they are experiencing it directly in their own wallet. And then the experiences go from browser to connect to TV, and also, of course, mobile. And one thing that I'm interested to learn in the forum is to what extent you all really do think the sort of headset environments are going to matter. We have so far stuck to very mainstream consumer type experiences through the browsers and connected TVs. The projects that are interactive are typically built in Unity, for example, and then served as part of your sort of static self-referential project, right, from the Fabric. And then have interactive points within them that are drawing from the fabric. That kind of thing, I think, is quite mainstream. Very interested to see kind of what the general opinion is about other types of experiences that are perhaps more VR and less sort of interactive or AR oriented. And then, of course, lastly, I would say we are really focused on enabling the publishers and the audiences. That's what this is all about. And for lots of reasons, we all know that, this organization is focused on experience. I would say the other side is the economics. I mean, we've clearly been in an era where, data and creator control, whether large or small, hasn't really been there. And we obviously believe in changing that. So I'm gonna kind of move forward here. One last thing I would say that Serban will get into, when you see the fabric working, I think if there is something remarkable about it, it is that there is no content delivery network in terms of a traditional like an Akamai or a Fastly. There's also no traditional media stack like an AWS media services or some other kind of transcoding stack. Everything that you typically think of, from the source to the output to the consumer, is done in the fabric itself. And that's for the video, that's for the interactive, that's for the metadata, that's for the websites. And that principle, we feel like, is really foundational to being able to break away from the limitations, both architecturally, performance-wise, and also, just pure scale-wise from where video and sorts of file both static and dynamic media experiences have been. So I'll leave it at that, and we'll explain that a little bit more. As I mentioned, I'm going to be focusing on some immersive content serving today, combined with streaming that is all essentially directly distributed to the consumer with Web3 primitives. And I'm going to skip over all this stuff and just get right into it. So this is a use case that I wanted to talk to, and we are pretty deeply involved in this day to day. Warner Brothers is one of the Hollywood studios that lots of people probably know, and has had a really, I think, interesting idea to create a new type of consumer experience with their movie library. They've released so far 2 movies this way. We're getting into our 3rd, which will actually be a new release this time, as opposed to from the catalog. And the idea is of this was to really exploit a combination of collectability, rich media of both current and sort of back footage, as well as interactive experiences. And they call these bundles, if you will, Web3 movies. Lord of the Rings was the first that they produced this way. The point of the fabric is that it is the technology platform behind the experiences. So the basic idea is that a bundle of content, which is grounded in the full-length feature film and extras, bonus extras of special features, audio commentaries, image galleries, and then specially produced collectibles, which include WebXR objects, for example, hand-drawn and produced digital imagery or custom-drawn digital imagery, that sort of thing, are all published to the fabric, served to the consumer, and then owned and experienced as an ERC 721 token, minted on the Content Fabric blockchain and authorized through its capabilities. And the main reason to do this isn't so much to lean into the NFT market. The purpose was to really experiment with a new type of sell-through for the consumer and a future for ownership of content. It's no secret that divisions like home entertainment have in the past had physical sorts of distributions like Blu-rays and whatnot. And so part of this, of course, is to replace the void of that in terms of just selling to the consumer. The other part is to experiment in terms of the engagement. In the most recent movie that we released this way, Superman, there's also redeemable offers, which themselves allow the user to redeem in the bundle an offer for other experiences. In this case, it was a DC digital comic experience through the DC NFT project. And that too is embedded into the experience, updated dynamically, allows for on-chain redemption uniquely per wallet. And then the users, get to enjoy that part of the offer, and Warner gets to work or contact or engage directly with them. I'm going to show you the experience live in just a moment, but I wanted to just kind of set the stage. So this collage is what the experience looks like, the website, the storefront for obtaining the bundles, the interactive experience that's embedded, which is really the part that this group probably cares about, which is, and then also the unbundled media that sort of reveals itself in a flat form. The interactive experience that I'm going to demo in just a second, that is a Unity generated project that itself is actually served as a streaming file, compressed streaming file format from the fabric, and it includes interactive points. Those interactive points actually from data load other URLs that are served dynamically from the fabric, the feature film, the bonus footage, the galleries, the XR objects. They actually produce several web XR objects to embed into this. And the reason I'm kind of going through this architecture is that that's the part, as we've gone into this, we've learned a few things from this format, which is that one, it is very favorable to have this kind of componentized, decentralized serving model where you can have these hotspots in the experience that draw on demand from this fast performing backplane. That makes it very light to distribute. It means the browser isn't loading all the stuff at once. It also means you can put anything into the experience. The second point to more standards effort is all of that is done through a really standardized embed URL. It's also under the control of blockchain encryption and authorization. And that's also good because then you can protect what goes into the experiences, again, in a componentized way. And for instance, the feature film in that embed experience, when it loads and plays, it's protected through strong DRM. Whereas some of the other like image elements that aren't as valuable, those just have a looser authorization token that just requires that the user be logged into a wallet that owns the experience, for example, right? And then finally, the last thing I would say about this that I feel, having gone through this a couple of times, that is extremely important to the standardization efforts is to be able to make this very easy on the publishing side. As often happens in the creative realms, and I'm sure you all experience this every day, projects tend to have this cycle where they move slowly through a development phase, and then toward the end, toward production, they move extraordinarily fast to release time. And during that time, it's extremely important to be able to have a model that can publish on demand, update versions seamlessly, have everyone be able to see, and then finally to be able to have even the consumer's experience updated seamlessly, without the consumer sometimes even knowing. And one of the things that's true, Serban will go over this, is that all of the content objects serve under, in the protocol under the controller auspices of a version hash. And all these experiences exploit that. So for example, when we need to push in new XR objects, which Warner released on the anniversary of Lord of the Rings, or during Superman, which we just released when we had to push an update to the experience because the creative team needed to add something in, right? That can all be done by just updating the version hash of the object. And then in the case of these tokenized bundles, being able to just run a command that updates the mapped content object version that relates back to the token URI. And I'm saying
we are running out of time.
We're running out of time, so I should get to it. Okay, really, really fast. I just want to show really quick interactive experience. You guys can get a feel for what that feels like. So here is my Lord of the Rings bundle in my wallet. I launched that interactive experience, which is going to load from the fabric. You can see the URL up here, enter the experience, and all these, you can get your own and play with it and test it out yourself, right? Key ideas are to include the ability to play the feature film, be able to traverse into these different places within the film experience, be able to, see if I can, Serban's making me hurry through this. So be able to load things like interactive XR objects, for example. And if you scan that on your phone, it'll pull into your AR on the Apple AR on your phone itself. See if I can do a couple of other quick things. Let me get you a gallery over in the Shire so you can kind of see that. Let's pop back to the main area. And one thing you do notice in this is it does, serve fast, and it's meant for a, kind of a consumer grade. Let's see if I can get to the Shire here. Get a fine grain control over that. I want to enter the Shire. I skipped over the Shire. All right, fine. I'll just show you a different gallery there. That's one thing. I think the touch on that is a little bit, let's do this one. Let's do it behind the scenes gallery. These are the embedded galleries. Superman actually has also some, what's the best way to put it? Scanning glasses mode, where you can actually scan through the scenes on screen and then actually play the individual content. You can also load, they have a particular area where you can actually load a carousel of several pieces of video, and that's done 3D interactively, right? So all of these things that I'm loading right now through that experience, if you actually trace in the browser, you'll see that those are embed URLs that are served directly, from the content fabric. And then finally, when you're back in the main outside of the interactive experience, like the feature film, going through this unlocks from a blockchain ownership perspective, the interactive collectibles and all the bonus footage and content in this flat view as well. One other thing I would say, we're currently bringing this to the TV. So, without saying a whole lot, future experiences are not only in the browser, they will also be on the connected TV platforms. Serban, I'm sorry I took your time. I will let you talk a little bit. I think we have about 10 minutes left for Serban to talk to the protocol, and I'll turn it to you.
All right, sounds good. So we're interrupting the exciting part to get to some of the boring things. So I'm Serban and Simu, the other founders of Eluvio, and what I've prepared here is a conceptual view on what is the content fabric and what is really special about the underpinnings of what constitutes this content platform. So first, the way I want to go through this is just understand what we don't like about how these video on the internet and interactive experience on top of that is done currently on the internet, right? So starting with the motivation, internet, as we know, is heavily used for content. Way over, I said 80% of traffic, but probably 85 to 90% of traffic is media on the current internet, but the internet obviously has not been designed for content. Also, kind of on a conceptual level, we don't have a structure for content. In the internet, there isn't such thing as content, right? So now to implement an application, a media-rich application, whether in the more immersive metaverse or just more simple, traditional video, currently we have various application designs that have to do with files being pre-rendered and copied on CDNs and having databases and CMS, content management services, as well as application backends that do different logic. So part of this is introducing the concept of a content object that I'm going to talk about in a moment as well. Then, of course, media-based application use multi-tier and multi-vendor architectures to implement all the various pieces, such as the I mentioned the transcoding stacks, then pre-rendering all the versions of the files such that we can put them on CDNs and so on. And there are full service platforms that simply let you upload a video and then watch it on the other end. But these are just wrappers on top of this very complicated architecture. And then, of course, conventional CDNs are wasteful from the point of view of having to pre-render files and copying them everywhere. And then, of course, they don't have features because everything needs to be a file and made in advance and limited edge processing capability. Now, so what motivates the design of the content fabric is the idea that a content platform needs to provide all services that are necessary to build content applications, not storage, not transcoding, not DRM, not CMS, which are all parts of it. But the idea is that what constitutes the set of the features that this protocol needs to deliver so an application can be built on top of it without having to use other pieces of architecture. So the reason we started with Michelle's demonstration of the Lord of the Rings is that particular application has no other backend. It uses the content fabric as its sole backend and no other component. There's no other CMS, there's no other CDN, there's no other transcoding, there's no other application services. And that's the point of Michelle's touched a little bit on that, so I'm going to skip a couple of things in the interest of time. But now, beyond the technical motivations, the sort of societal impact motivations of the content fabric are the enablement of the creator economy without having to be tied or dependent on what currently is the big tech, the Google, Amazon sort of cloud services and transcoding platforms and so on. And then part of this is also democratize the content internet infrastructure. So these are sort of the high-level societal motivations. And then to that extent, to that goal, the design goals of the content fabric, I'll start with what I just mentioned, is just provide all services necessary to build content applications. I want to make an analogy to the internet as we know it, because the internet, when you connect to the internet, you immediately get access to routing protocols, to border gateway protocols, right? You can connect from that particular wire that plugged in a computer or wireless to the entire world of the network of the internet. The same concept applies to content. The way we're thinking of the content platform is once you're on the content platform, you have access to all the pieces that are of the protocol that are required to build content experiences. Simplified architectures, because we want to allow the infrastructure of the content fabric to scale beyond the computers that one company can own. Right, so we live in a world of what we call the multi-CDN, where in order to implement an application, we need to use a bunch of computers that Akamai has deployed, a bunch of computers that Amazon AWS has deployed, or Fastly or CDN 79. So the idea is that each company owns a bunch of computers, it puts them out there, then they compete on how many more computers they have than the other guy. And that's generally the architecture that we're looking at saying, we can implement a content internet that doesn't require that. Just like the regular internet is not owned by a company, right? You don't connect to a Cisco internet or you don't connect to a Comcast internet. The internet is made of nodes, routers, and so on that are owned by companies, but the internet itself is not owned by one, right? So that's the idea of the content fabric. In the architecture, the computers that made the content fabric don't have to be owned by a single company. So it also needs to scale linearly with a number of nodes, right? You need more of it, just like the regular internet. I'm making the same analogy, just like we scale the internet by adding more autonomous systems, more gateway protocol routers, then the same thing with the content fabric. It scales by adding more nodes to it. Now, content needs to be organized for ease of management. That's what I mentioned in that we don't have a concept of content. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on that because I think that's more relevant to kind of where the standards forum is focused. And then, of course, end-to-end content security and ownership. Then content is to be private and not tamper-proof, and ownership needs to be asserted by simply looking at the content platform, right? And then the other thing that I'm going to spend a little bit more time on is content transformation. So content is stored in its source format. Like if you look at a video, you cannot play video over the internet in its source format. You don't download an 800 gigabyte file and play it, right? So the protocol, the playout protocols, commonly currently Dash and HLS, are designed such that bitrate can adapt to the user's internet connection and so on. Now, in order to produce HLS from a source file in video, for example, you need to transform the content from its source format into this HLS format. And that's part of the job of the content fabric, is to do that transformation such that you don't require that the content is transformed ahead of time into a bunch of little files and copied everywhere as we do now. That is the job of the content fabric. And then finally, it needs to provide real-time delivery, because all of the interactive experiences, video or just the 3D model, gaming and so on, it is all interactive. Everything needs to be delivered in real time. So the design of the content fabric needs to be such that it knows that things are real time. It's not going to in-queue a request and then serve it 10 seconds later. That's the whole idea. So design goals. The way I'm going to go over this, I'm going to quickly, in sort of one slide, go over the protocol at a glance, the whole thing, how it works. And after which I'm going to come back to the concepts and then go through each of the concepts. And then depending on how much time we have, we can see where we want to stop there. But imagine the simple view of the protocol. The content fabric is just a bunch of computers that are all the same. Again, they don't have to be owned by the same organization either. Just like I made the analogy with the internet and the routers in the internet. Now, when you ingest content in the content fabric, as a user with my laptop, I pick a particular node that's close to me, and the protocol provides me that ability. The protocol provides me the ability to find a node that's close to me. And if that node dies, then it gives me another node that's close to me. That's part of the protocol. When content is ingested in the content fabric, it gets chopped down in what we call content parts. It gets encrypted using a content encryption technique that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. And it gets conditioned such that it can be served, it can be transformed in real time and served in this just-in-time content representation fashion that I'd mentioned before. So the conditioning, for example, on a video includes encoding it into a mezzanine level format. It includes adding iframes in the various pieces, in the various places where we know the content fabric protocol will require, and so on. But generally, ingesting source media would simply be that. Conditioning, chopping down, encrypting parts, and then it gets stored and distributed in the content fabric. Then now the parts are linked together by what we call the content object concept. And the content object constitutes all the metadata that relates these pieces together to implement, for example, the Lord of the Ring experience. And I'll get to some details a little bit later. So now, once the media is in the content fabric, if a user wants to, I'm picking again the simplest example of just watching a movie, that's how it works. The consumer on the other side of the continent can just click play. That consumer application will find, again, the content protocol allows me to find a node that's nearby. And in that, we call it the egress node. All nodes are egress eligible. It's that no nodes are more egress than others. All nodes are the same. That particular node that the consumer hits is in charge of figuring out how to make what the user wants to see. The user, let's say, is on an Apple iPhone. Then we need to deliver HLS with Fairplay DRM. That node will pick up the content object, will retrieve the metadata parts, the structure metadata, and say what are the source media content parts that would allow me to make HLS manifests and HLS segments. What are the encryption key flows that allow me to make Fairplay DRM, and then just in time prepares the HLS manifest and the HLS segments for that user. So that is that's how it works. Now, as a content publisher, I have the ability to operate my content in a very familiar fashion, for example, to source control, where any changes to my content are going to constitute a new version, even though the media can be large. I may have an 800 gigabyte media source file, but as I change components, of it. Then I create new versions. All the versions are available. All the versions can be watched until I decide that I want to explicitly remove them from the system. And the access control is applied at the content fabric node level as well. And we have some details about that. But the idea is that we don't need to go to another system to provide access control. The node itself can retrieve the access control policy that is associated with this content object, and then apply that policy before serving content to an user. That's generally how it works, the flow of it. And then once that all is done, once other details of sort of the full functionality envelope of the content fabric is that all the usage, all users that have watched my movie, for example, the usage records are also stored in content fabric parts. They are encrypted for the content owner, and then they can be delivered either in detail or in an aggregation by any node to the content owner that would constitute the raw sort of usage records that would allow a content owner to produce engagement reports, session, viewer, and so on. And also the content fabric nodes themselves use this information to produce the bill and how much they charge the tenant for the usage. So that's generally the idea of it. A bunch of computers that are all the same, and then they provide these functions. So in order to achieve this, these are the main, I call them pillars of the content fabric protocol. Content objects, as I mentioned, structuring the media into what we call content object. Storage, of course, content is to be stored. Content routing, this is a very different approach from how we do content delivery today. Content representations, the ability to create what the user needs from the media source, avoiding having to pre-prepare all the various things that we anticipate user needs. Each content object, content nodes are in charge of creating those representations just in time. There's a distributed and decentralized ledger, which minimally stores all of the content ownership and content access control policies and generally governance information. The ledger in our implementation of the content fabric is a blockchain, Ethernet, Ethereum compatible, EVM compatible blockchain that just stores minimally hashes and signatures that would allow to represent, to attest all the ownership and all the operations of the fabric. Now, the content spaces and node governance is part of the protocol as well. What governs is, I'd mentioned that nodes don't have to belong to the same company, which means that they need to be governed by a protocol largely like, let's say, internet routing is governed by routing protocols, right? So then each node has its responsibilities. If it doesn't do the right thing, it's not going to be part of it. Content encryption and access control also a critical pillar because it assures the secure functioning of the content fabric. And content commerce, which is what opens up, as I mentioned, it just opens up the sort of the technical stack to the more societal impact, creator economy, and democratization of the infrastructure. So with this, what I've prepared here is a little bit of details about each of these. They're I'm going to skip talking about the decentralized ledger because that's simply a blockchain that's commonly.
Hey, Serban, I wanted to mention, in the interest of time, a lot of people ask fantastic, deep questions on the protocol. I included the core protocol white paper link in the chat. That is the full-on, 22-pager, but it does answer everything I've seen so far that people have asked, and it really can't be answered less than that because of the pillars. That paper is describes each of those 7 pillars, and hopefully is helpful to someone who really wants to know, right? Yeah,
the white paper is structured exactly like this, and I think one thing, I noticed one question before I start my presentation that I want to answer because I think it makes a great point. Where the question was, referring to the Lord of the Rings Web3 movie experience, can this be done with a regular CDN? So my answer is yes, but in order to do that, then what you would need to do, instead of having the one content object that constitutes the Lord of the Rings experience of the content fabric, which is basically the source components of all the media and the code that knows how to make all these representations, right? That's the content object. In order to do that, you need to actually take that data and pre-render all the variants of it offline, just like we currently do with HLS. Pre-render all the galleries, all the HLS segments, all the dash segments, and so on. And then publish them on a CDN. Then you need to make a database that just has the information as what piece goes where, what images are part of the one gallery, what images are part of the other galleries, like how do you make it? So then you would need a database and an application backend that would know that information, right?
And
So
may I add one more piece to that, because I'm very close to these experiences. The whole other dimension that you would have to build is you also have to build a layer that's able to effectively tokenize that content. And then you need to create yourself an encryption and authorization glue that essentially verifies that ownership in relation to serving that content securely to an owning user. And then finally, to do what we're actually doing, you also need to come up with a way to update in real time the content experience that the user's getting as associated with that ownership. And lastly, you have to come up with the way to serve that interactive experience where the individual media elements that are drawn from in the interactive experience are coming from somewhere, right? And that would have to be also built bespoke. And the difference here is that none of that is bespoke. It's all content objects. And that's where, I mean, our kind of point is, of course, every one of these things can be done with the existing technology that we have, if you take the effort to piece all that together and build it bespoke. But that's, so limiting to what people are trying to do that, we had the thought that you could create a foundational protocol that could do this for you, easily out of the box at scale, right?
And then that's the reason I wanted to address that question, because I think it just hits exactly the motivation of the content fabric. I think the design of it is to avoid exactly that. DevOps, when you know how that works. You need to create.
And the other is cost. I also want to mention that, I mean, there's no secret that the metaverse, as everyone knows, is long tail. Most of what's being done is not going to be blockbuster style audiences where 300 million people are doing the same thing and you can afford to spend $10 million in a day on your serving like you do with the Super Bowl streaming, right? I mean, it's not like that. And as a result, you also need much greater efficiency to be able to really achieve the kind of interest points people are after in the long tail. And this also has the property, I mean, I didn't dwell on this, but this is a marketing project for in the movies, the case of the Warner movies. The marketing project has a budget, and the marketing project has to, not lose money. And in fact, these projects don't lose money, and they have been profitable, actually, right? And that's the, that's just one example, but I think that's really foundational to why you would go about this in the first place. And we feel really strongly that the internet's been stuck in this sort of like mega model where the only creative that's able to really, be profitable is the stuff that's gigantic, right?
Yeah, that's, I mean, I hope I got the point across. There's a detail. I think we can also share this slide. I made a slide for each of these, just very, very high points, but I think we're about running out of time. It's about 7:52 right now. Maybe the right thing to do is stop here, and then we can see what folks would like to see in terms of sharing some of the overview. Michelle, I shared the white paper, which has it's basically a detailed version of what I have.